She grabbed my grandmother's wedding dress from my hands, and before I could even process what was happening, the sound of ripping fabric filled the room like a scream. 60 years of delicate ivory silk, hand-sewn pearls, and French lace torn, apart in seconds by my own sister's manicured nails. "There," Jessica said, dropping the shredded remains at my feet like garbage. "Now you can't embarrass me by wearing that ugly old thing to my wedding." What she didn't know was that the ugly old thing she'd just destroyed was worth $50,000, and I was about to make sure she found out in the most devastating way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Shaira, and I've spent most of my 28 years being the invisible sister in a family that treated Jessica like she walked on water while I crawled through mud. Growing up in our Phoenix suburban home, the hierarchy was crystal clear from day one. Jessica got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the college fund, and every ounce of our parents' attention and pride. I got hand-me-downs, community college, and the constant reminder that I should be grateful for whatever scraps were left over. The dress incident happened 3 weeks before Jessica's wedding to Tyler, her college sweetheart who came from old Phoenix money and drove a Tesla his daddy bought him for graduation. Jessica had been planning this wedding for 2 years, turning our family home into mission control for what she called the event of the century. Every conversation revolved around centerpieces, guest lists, and how perfect everything had to be for her perfect day with her perfect life. I had just gotten home from my job at the county assessor's office where I worked as a property records specialist, a job that paid decent money but earned me exactly zero respect from my family. "Still pushing papers," Dad would say whenever anyone asked what I did for work, like it was something shameful instead of honest employment that required actual skills and attention to detail. Jessica worked part-time at a boutique downtown, but somehow that was considered more prestigious because she got to play dress-up and socialize with customers all day. That evening, I had finally worked up the courage to ask Mom if I could wear Nana Rose's wedding dress to Jessica's ceremony. Nana Rose was my father's mother, a woman who had immigrated from Italy in the 1940s and married my grandfather in a dress she'd saved for months to afford. The dress had been stored in our attic for decades, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper and preserved in a climate-controlled garment box. I'd discovered it when I was helping clean out Nana's things after she passed away 5 years earlier. Mom was in the kitchen with Jessica, going over seating charts for the reception, when I brought the dress downstairs. The moment I unzipped the garment bag, Jessica's face twisted into disgust. "Oh my God, Shaira, you cannot be serious," she said, looking at the dress like it was covered in mold. "That thing is ancient and hideous. The sleeves are puffy, the neckline is completely wrong, and look at that yellow tinge. You'll look like you're wearing a costume from a history museum." I tried to explain that the dress just needed to be cleaned and maybe taken in a little, that it was a piece of our family history and would be meaningful to wear. "Nana Rose would have loved knowing her dress was being worn again," I said, running my fingers over the intricate beadwork along the bodice. The dress was actually stunning, even after all these years. The silk had developed a rich ivory patina that looked elegant rather than aged, and the craftsmanship was something you'd never find in modern wedding dresses. But Jessica wasn't hearing it. "I don't care what Nana Rose would have wanted," she snapped. "This is my wedding, and I'm not having my maid of honor walking down the aisle looking like a reject from an antique store. Everyone will be staring at that ugly dress instead of focusing on me, and I've worked too hard planning this wedding to have you ruin it with some musty old rag." Mom, as usual, immediately took Jessica's side. "Shaira, honey, Jessica has a point. Maybe you could find something more modern and appropriate? I'm sure we could go shopping this weekend and find you something nice from one of those department stores." The way she said department stores made it clear she thought that was the best I deserved, while Jessica's own wedding dress had cost $8,000 and came from an exclusive bridal boutique in Scottsdale. I felt the familiar burn, of humiliation rising in my chest, but I pressed on. Mom, this dress is family history. It's not just any old dress. It's Nana's wedding dress. Don't you think there's something beautiful about honoring her memory this way? I was grasping for any argument that might make them understand, but I could see from their expressions that they'd already made up their minds. That's when Jessica stood up from the kitchen table, walked over to where I was holding the dress, and snatched it right out of my hands. You know what, Shaira? Since you're being so stubborn about this, let me make the decision easier for you. And that's when she grabbed the delicate fabric with both hands and started tearing. The sound was horrific, like something alive being killed. 60 years of careful preservation destroyed in seconds by pure spite. The hand-sewn pearls scattered across the kitchen floor like tears. The French lace that had taken months to create by hand now hung in tatters, and the silk bodice that had been cut and fitted by master seamstresses in post-war Italy was reduced to scraps. I stood there in complete shock, watching pieces of my grandmother's most precious possession falling around my feet. Jessica didn't stop until the dress was completely unwearable, until every seam was split, every delicate detail destroyed. When she was finished, she brushed her hands off like she'd just taken out the trash and said, "There, problem solved. Now you'll have to buy something appropriate like I wanted you to from the beginning." Mom said nothing. She didn't gasp. She didn't scold Jessica. She didn't even look upset. She just sighed and said, "Well, I guess we'll definitely need to go shopping this weekend now." Like I was somehow to blame for this destruction, like I had forced Jessica to destroy a family heirloom by being unreasonable about wanting to wear it. I knelt down and started gathering the pieces, my hands shaking as I tried to collect every scrap of fabric, every scattered pearl. Some part of me thought maybe it could be repaired. Maybe if I found the right seamstress or restoration, expert Nana's dress could be saved. But even as I thought it, I knew the truth. This wasn't damage that could be fixed. This was obliteration. "Don't be so dramatic," Jessica said, watching me scramble around on the floor. "It's just an old dress. Nana's been dead for 5 years. It's not like she's going to know the difference. You're acting like I destroyed the Mona Lisa or something." She laughed at her own joke, and Mom smiled along with her, both of them treating the destruction of irreplaceable family history like it was some minor inconvenience I was overreacting to. I gathered every piece I could find and took them up to my room, where I spread them out on my bed and really looked at what Jessica had done. The dress hadn't just been ripped, it had been systematically destroyed. She'd torn every seam, shredded every piece of lace, even pulled apart the internal structure that had given the dress its shape. This wasn't accidental damage or a moment of anger. This was calculated destruction designed to ensure the dress could never be worn again. That night, lying in bed surrounded by the remains of Nana Rose's wedding dress, something fundamental shifted inside me. Not anger, exactly, though I was angry. Not sadness, though I was heartbroken. It was something colder and more determined. It was the realization that I had spent my entire life accepting treatment from my family that I would never tolerate from strangers, and that their love for me was so conditional and fragile that they could watch precious family history be destroyed and feel nothing but mild annoyance at my reaction. But what they didn't know, what they'd never bothered to learn about me during all those years of treating me like furniture, was that my job at the county assessor's office had given me access to information they'd never imagined I possessed. I knew the real value of every piece of property our family owned. I knew about the investments Dad thought he'd hidden. I knew about the life insurance policies and the retirement accounts and the trust fund that had been set up for both Jessica and me, but that they'd been planning to give entirely to her because Jessica will need it more when she has children. More importantly, I knew that 3 months earlier, when Dad had his heart scare and thought he might die, he'd made me the executor of his estate and given me power of attorney over all family financial decisions if anything happened to him. He'd chosen me because I was the responsible one, the one who understood paperwork and legal stuff, the one who could be trusted to handle complicated financial matters. He'd signed those papers without reading them carefully, trusting that I would always do what was best for the family. What he didn't realize was that I'd been doing what was best for the family my entire life, and the family had never once done what was best for me. That equation was about to change dramatically. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As I sat there holding pieces of my grandmother's destroyed wedding dress, I started making mental notes about everything I knew and everything I had access to. The house we lived in was worth $400,000 and was in Dad's name. But I had power of attorney. The investment account he'd been building for Jessica's future had grown to nearly $200,000 over the years. The family business, a small but profitable property management company that Dad had built from nothing, was worth at least $500,000 and generated steady monthly income. Jessica thought she'd destroyed an old dress to get her way about wedding aesthetics. What she'd actually done was destroy the last thread of loyalty I felt toward a family that had never valued me as anything more than free labor and emotional support for their golden child. She'd pushed me too far, and she was about to learn that the invisible sister she'd been dismissing her entire life had been quietly accumulating power while she'd been playing princess. The wedding was still 3 weeks away. 3 weeks for me to let them think everything was normal. 3 weeks for me to plan my next moves carefully. 3 weeks for Jessica to enjoy her engagement bliss before discovering that actions have consequences and family loyalty flows both ways or not at all. I carefully folded every scrap of Nana's dress and put them in a box. Not because I thought they could be repaired, but because I wanted to remember this moment. I wanted to remember the sound of 60 years of family history being torn apart by someone who thought love was a competition she'd already won. I wanted to remember the feeling of watching my parents do nothing while something irreplaceable was destroyed right in front of them. Most of all, I wanted to remember that this was the moment I stopped being the family doormat and started being someone who couldn't be ignored, dismissed, or destroyed. Jessica had torn up the wrong dress, and she was about to find out that some things once broken can never be put back together again. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. While Jessica slept in until noon like she always did, I was already at my desk by 7 a.m., pulling up property records and financial documents that most people didn't even know existed. What my family had never understood about my job at the county assessor's office was that it wasn't just about pushing papers like Dad loved to say. It was about understanding how money moved, how assets were protected, and how legal documents could be used to secure or destroy someone's financial future. I started with the house. Our family home at 4847 Desert Vista Drive had been purchased by Dad in 1987 for $85,000. Today, it was worth $412,000, according to the most recent assessment I'd run just last week. The mortgage had been paid off 3 years ago, which meant the house was sitting on over $400,000 in equity with no debt attached. Dad had mentioned several times that he planned to leave the house to Jessica because she'll need somewhere to live when she starts having babies, completely ignoring the fact that Tyler's family already owned a 6-bedroom mansion in Paradise Valley that Jessica would be moving into after the wedding. But here's what Dad didn't remember about those power of attorney papers he'd signed during his health scare. I didn't just have the authority to make medical decisions if he became incapacitated. I had full financial power of attorney, which meant I could make any legal transaction involving his assets, as long as I could demonstrate it was in his best interest or the family's best interest. The language was deliberately broad, and Dad's lawyer had explained that it was designed to give me maximum flexibility in case of emergency. Well, this felt like an emergency to me. An emergency of respect, of recognition, of basic human decency that had been missing from my family relationships for 28 years. I pulled up the deed to the house and studied it carefully. the property was titled solely in Dad's name, which meant Mom had no legal claim to it if something happened. This was actually pretty common for houses purchased before marriages became more financially complicated, but it also meant that with my power of attorney, I could theoretically execute any transaction involving the house that I deemed necessary. Next, I accessed the investment accounts. Dad had been steadily putting money away for both Jessica and me since we were children. But over the years, the contributions to my account had gotten smaller and smaller, while Jessica's had grown larger and larger. Currently, Jessica's education and future fund sat at $197,000, while mine had stagnated at about $43,000. The explanation I'd always been given was that Jessica needed more support because she was pursuing creative interests and would probably need help getting established after college. What they meant was that Jessica had changed her major 4 times, taken 6 years to graduate with a degree in communications that she'd never used, and had been partially supported by family money ever since, while working part-time retail jobs, that she treated more like social activities than actual employment. Meanwhile, I'd worked full-time through community college, paid for my own certification programs, and had been financially independent since I was 22. But the real discovery came when I dug deeper into Dad's business records. Phoenix Property Solutions, the property management company he'd built over the past 15 years, was worth significantly more than I'd realized. I'd always assumed it was a small operation that maybe managed a dozen rental properties and brought in enough money to supplement Dad's retirement savings. What I found when I accessed the real records was a business that managed over 200 rental units across Phoenix and Scottsdale, generating nearly $70,000 in monthly revenue, and probably worth close to $800,000 if sold to the right buyer. The business was structured as a sole proprietorship under Dad's name, which meant it was legally part of his personal assets. With my power of attorney, I had the authority to make business decisions on his behalf, including everything from rental agreements to major financial transactions. Dad had always handled the business side of things himself, keeping the books on an old computer in his home office, and never involving Mom or Jessica in any of the operational details. This was when I realized that Jessica destroying Nana's dress hadn't just been a moment of spite. It had been the catalyst that finally opened my eyes to exactly how much power I actually had in this family, and how little respect I'd been getting, in return for being the reliable, trustworthy daughter who could be counted on to handle important responsibilities. I spent the entire day researching and planning. I looked up property values, reviewed legal documents, and made phone calls to real estate agents and business brokers to get a sense of current market conditions. By evening, I had a comprehensive understanding of my family's financial situation and a clear plan for what I was going to do about it. The house was worth $412,000. The business was worth approximately $800,000. The investment accounts totaled $240,000. Combined, my parents were sitting on nearly $1.5 million in assets, most of which they'd been planning to leave primarily to Jessica because she was the favored child who would need more help in life. What they'd never considered was what would happen if the daughter they'd given legal authority to decided that favoritism was a luxury they could no longer afford. That evening at dinner, Jessica was bubbling with excitement about her final dress fitting scheduled for the following week. She'd been talking about this dress for months, a custom creation from an exclusive bridal boutique that had cost $8,000 and required 4 separate fittings to get perfect. "It's going to be absolutely stunning," she gushed to Mom. The beadwork alone took them 6 weeks to complete, and the silk is imported from France. Tyler's going to die when he sees me walking down the aisle. I listened to her go on and on about the importance of looking perfect, about how this was the most important day of her life, about how everything had to be exactly right because she'd been dreaming of this wedding since she was a little girl. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was waxing poetic about the craftsmanship and emotional significance of her dress less than 24 hours after destroying a dress that, had infinitely more history and emotional value. What about you, Shaira? Mom asked. Have you found something to wear yet? We really do need to go shopping this weekend. The way she said it made it clear that this was now my problem to solve, that Jessica's destruction of Nana's dress had somehow become my responsibility to fix by finding an acceptable replacement. Actually, I said, cutting into my chicken carefully, I've been thinking about the dress situation, and I've decided to take a different approach. I looked up at Jessica, who was scrolling through wedding photos on her phone while she ate. I'm going to have Nana's dress professionally restored, Jessica snorted. Good luck with that. There's nothing left to restore. I made sure of that. She said it with such casual cruelty, like she was proud of how thoroughly she'd destroyed something irreplaceable. We'll see, I said simply. I've been doing some research, and apparently there are specialists who can work miracles with damaged vintage clothing. It might cost a few $1,000s, but some things are worth preserving regardless of the expense. Dad looked up from his plate. A few $1,000s? Shaira, that's ridiculous. It's just a dress. You can buy a perfectly nice dress for a few $100s and save yourself the trouble. This was typical dad logic. Spend $8,000 on Jessica's dress without question, but suggest that I spend a fraction of that amount on preserving family history, and suddenly it's fiscally irresponsible. You're right, Dad, I said. It is a lot of money, but I've been thinking about that too, and I realized I have access to funds that could cover the restoration cost. I took a sip of water and looked around the table at my family. Actually, I've been thinking about a lot of things lately. About family priorities, about how we value each other, about what really matters in the long run. Mom and Dad exchanged one of those looks that parents share when they think their child is about to say something embarrassing or inappropriate. Jessica wasn't even paying attention, still absorbed in her phone and her wedding planning obsession. The thing is, I continued, I realized that I've been approaching this all wrong. I've been trying to fit into the family dynamic instead of recognizing that I actually have more influence over this family's future than anyone has acknowledged. I put down my fork and looked directly at Dad. Remember those papers you signed? When you had your heart episode? The power of attorney documents? Dad nodded absently. Of course, just standard precautionary stuff in case something happened to me. You know, medical decisions and basic financial management if I couldn't handle things myself. Right, I said. Except the documents were more comprehensive than that. They actually give me full authority over all financial decisions related to your assets, including the house, the business, and the investment accounts. I watched his face change as he started to understand what I was saying. I spent today reviewing everything, and I have to say, I'm impressed by how much you've built over the years. Phoenix Property Solutions is doing really well, isn't it? The table went quiet. Jessica finally looked up from her phone, sensing that the conversation had shifted into territory that might actually affect her. Mom was staring at me with a confused expression, like she couldn't quite process what I was talking about. Shaira, Dad said slowly, what exactly are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that I've spent my entire life being treated like the less important child in this family. And yesterday, Jessica destroyed something irreplaceable that belonged to all of us, not just me. Nana Rose's dress was family history, and it was destroyed out of pure selfishness and spite. I looked at Jessica, who was now paying full attention. But what I realized today is that I don't have to just accept that treatment anymore. I have legal authority over assets worth over $1 million. And I think it's time this family started showing me the respect that level of responsibility deserves. Dad was starting to look alarmed. Now wait just a minute, Shaira. Those documents were signed for emergency situations, not for you to start making threats about family finances. I'm not making threats, I said calmly. I'm making observations. I'm observing that Jessica has been given every advantage in this family, while I've been expected to be grateful for whatever scraps were left over. I'm observing that when something Precious was destroyed yesterday. Nobody cared about my feelings or the historical significance of what was lost. I'm observing that I've been handling major financial responsibilities for this family while being treated like my opinions and feelings don't matter. Jessica finally spoke up. Are you seriously trying to blackmail us over some old dress? That's insane, Shaira. It was just a dress. No, Jessica, I said, turning to face her directly. It wasn't just a dress. It was our grandmother's wedding dress. It was a piece of family history that survived World War II, immigration, poverty, and 60 years of careful preservation. It was irreplaceable. And you destroyed it because you thought your feelings about wedding aesthetics were more important than preserving something that connected us to our family's past. I stood up from the table, feeling more confident than I had in years. But you're right about one thing. This isn't really about the dress anymore. This is about respect, and about recognizing that the daughter you've been taking for granted actually holds the keys to this family's financial future. Mom was wringing her hands, clearly distressed by the direction of the conversation. Honey, I think you're overreacting. We can talk about this calmly. Nobody meant to hurt your feelings. Actually, Mom, I think Jessica meant exactly to hurt my feelings. She wanted to make sure I couldn't wear Nana's dress, so she destroyed it completely rather than just telling me no. That's not accidental hurt feelings. That's calculated cruelty. I picked up my plate and glass. But the good news is that I spent today figuring out how to make sure something like this never happens. Again. Dad was starting to look genuinely worried now. Shaira, let's talk about this privately. There's no need to involve the whole family in whatever you're thinking. Actually, Dad, I think there's every need to involve the whole family, because the whole family has been involved in treating me like I don't matter for my entire life. I headed toward the kitchen, then turned back. Oh, and Jessica, I'd recommend you start being a lot nicer to me between now and your wedding day. You might be surprised by how much your future happiness depends on staying in my good graces. I left them sitting at the table in stunned silence and went upstairs to my room, where I spent the evening making more phone calls and sending more emails. I contacted a vintage clothing restoration specialist in Los Angeles who confirmed that Nana's dress was likely beyond repair, but agreed to examine the pieces for a professional assessment. I researched property management companies that might be interested in acquiring an established business with a solid client base. I looked into real estate agents who specialized in high-value residential properties. Most importantly, I scheduled a meeting with an estate planning attorney for the following week to review the power of attorney documents and make sure I understood the full scope of my legal authority. I had a feeling I was going to need professional advice to navigate what was coming next. As I fell asleep that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the future. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to my family's treatment of me. I was actively planning to change the dynamic, and I had the legal authority and financial leverage to make it happen. Jessica thought she'd won by destroying the dress. What she'd actually done was destroy the last reason I had to protect her from the consequences of a lifetime of selfish behavior. She was about to learn that some victories come with a price tag she couldn't afford to pay. The wedding was still 2.5 weeks away. 2.5 weeks for Jessica to continue planning her perfect day, while I planned something that would be much more permanent. 2.5 weeks for my parents to think about whether they wanted to keep treating one daughter like she was disposable, while the other one held legal control over everything they'd worked their entire lives to build. I'd spent 28 years being the invisible daughter, the reliable one, the one who could be counted on to handle important responsibilities without expecting recognition or reward. Now it was time for my family to learn what happened when the invisible daughter decided to become impossible to ignore. The restoration specialist called me back the next evening. After examining the photos I'd sent of Nana's destroyed dress, she confirmed what I already knew. The damage was too extensive for restoration. "I'm so sorry," she said. "This appears to have been deliberate destruction rather than accidental damage. Someone wanted to make sure this dress could never be worn again. That's exactly what happened, I told her. My sister destroyed it, to prevent me from wearing it to her wedding. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I have to tell you, in 20 years of doing this work, I've never seen anything quite like this. The dress was clearly valuable, both financially and historically. To deliberately destroy something like this out of spite. Well, I hope you're planning to take legal action. Legal action. The phrase stuck with me after I hung up the phone. I hadn't considered the possibility that Jessica's destruction of the dress might constitute a crime, but the restoration specialist's reaction suggested that it might be more serious than just a family dispute. I spent the weekend researching property damage laws in Arizona. What I found was interesting. Deliberately destroying someone else's property worth more than $1,000 was considered criminal damage in the first degree, a Class 6 felony that could result in fines and even jail time. If the property was worth more than $10,000, it became a Class 4 felony with much more serious consequences. The question was, how much had Nana's dress actually been worth? I knew it was valuable because of its age and the quality of the craftsmanship, but I needed professional documentation to prove its value. I contacted several vintage clothing appraisers and auction houses, sending them the photographs I'd taken of the dress before it was destroyed. The responses I received were eye-opening. 3 different appraisers estimated the dress's value at between $45,000 and $60,000, with one noting that if it could be authenticated as the work of a specific Italian designer from the 1940s, it could be worth even more. A representative from a high-end auction house in New York said that post-war Italian wedding dresses in excellent condition were extremely rare and highly sought after by collectors. $60,000. Jessica had destroyed a $60,000 piece of family history because she thought it was ugly and didn't want me wearing it to her wedding. She'd committed what legally amounted to a serious felony, and she had no idea. But I wasn't ready to involve law enforcement just yet. I wanted to see how this played out within the family first. I wanted to give Jessica and my parents a chance to recognize the magnitude of what had happened and respond appropriately. If they couldn't do that, if they continued to treat this like it was just a minor disagreement about wedding attire, then I would start exploring other options. The appraisal documents gave me something else. Leverage. Jessica didn't know that she'd destroyed something worth more than most people's cars. She didn't know that her moment of spite had crossed the line from family drama into serious criminal behavior. She didn't know that I now had professional documentation of exactly how much damage she'd caused. What she also didn't know was that I'd spent the weekend putting together a comprehensive plan for restructuring our family's financial arrangements. The house, the business, the investment accounts. I'd figured out how to reorganize everything in a way that would ensure I could never again be treated as the less important child. It was time for a family meeting, and this time, I would be setting the agenda. Monday morning, I sent a group text to Mom, Dad, and Jessica. Family meeting tonight at 7 p.m. Kitchen table. We need to discuss some important financial and legal matters related to recent events. This is not optional. Jessica texted back immediately. What's this about? I'm busy with wedding stuff. I replied, it's about the consequences of destroying a $60,000 family heirloom. Be there. The silence that followed that text message was the most satisfying thing I'd experienced in months. For once, Jessica didn't have a snappy comeback or a dismissive response. For once, she was the one who had to sit with uncertainty and worry about what was coming next. Tonight, my family was going to learn that the quiet daughter they'd been ignoring had been paying attention to everything, and that some mistakes were too expensive to just laugh off and forget about. Tonight, Jessica was going to find out that destroying Nana's dress hadn't just hurt my feelings. It had changed the entire balance of power in our family. And her perfect wedding was still 2 weeks away. By Tuesday afternoon, the tension in our house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nobody had responded to my group text after I'd mentioned the $60,000 value, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were finally taking this situation. Jessica had spent Monday evening locked in her room, presumably researching vintage dress values and realizing that she might have made a much bigger mistake than she'd initially thought. Dad had left for work early Tuesday morning without saying goodbye, which was unusual for him. Mom had been cleaning compulsively since Monday night, which was what she always did when she was anxious and didn't know how to fix a problem. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for 7 o'clock to arrive. I, on the other hand, felt calmer than I had in years. I'd spent Monday evening organizing all of my documentation, the power of attorney papers, the property assessments, the business valuations, the appraisal reports for Nana's dress, and a detailed breakdown of every financial asset our family owned. I'd also prepared a proposal for how things were going to change moving forward, complete with legal justifications for every decision I was planning to make. At exactly 7 o'clock, I walked into the kitchen carrying a manila folder and found my entire family already seated around the table. The atmosphere was tense and expectant, like we were about to have a business meeting rather than a family discussion, which in many ways we were. "Thank you all for being here," I said, taking my usual seat, but feeling anything but usual. I know this isn't how we normally handle family issues, but then again, we've never had a family issue quite like this one before. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, a formal appraisal report with the letterhead of Morrison and Associates Fine Arts Appraisers. "Let's start with this," I said, sliding the paper across the table so everyone could see it. "This is a professional appraisal of Nana Rose's wedding dress, based on photographs taken before it was destroyed. The estimated value is $58,000, with a note that it could potentially be worth even more if we could prove the specific designer." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the color drain from Jessica's face as she read the document. Mom covered her mouth with her hand. Dad picked up the paper and read it twice, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. $58,000, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air. "That's what Jessica destroyed 3 days ago because she thought it was ugly and didn't want me wearing it to her wedding." Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "That can't be right. It was just an old dress from the 1940s. How could it possibly be worth that much money?" I pulled out a second document. "This explains it. Post-war Italian wedding dresses are extremely rare because most families couldn't afford elaborate gowns during that time period. The ones that do survive are highly prized by collectors and museums. Nana's dress was made by hand using techniques and materials that don't exist anymore. The silk alone would cost thousands of dollars to replicate today, assuming you could even find someone with the skills to do the beadwork and lacework." Dad was still staring at the appraisal report. "Jesus Christ, Shaira. I had no idea. If we'd known it was worth this much, we would have had it properly insured, maybe displayed it instead of keeping it in the attic." "That's exactly the point, Dad," I said. "You didn't know because you never bothered to find out. None of you cared enough about family history to research what we actually had. You just assumed that because it was old, it was worthless." I looked directly at Jessica. And when I tried to honor our grandmother's memory by wearing her dress, it was destroyed out of pure selfishness. Mom was crying now, quiet tears that she was trying to wipe away without anyone noticing. "Honey, if we'd known. Jessica never would have. We're all just sick about this." "Are you?" I asked. Because 3 days ago when it happened, nobody seemed sick about it. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody told Jessica that what she'd done was wrong. "Dad, you told me I was being dramatic about just a dress. Mom, you acted like this was my fault for being unreasonable about wanting to wear it in the first place." I pulled out another document, which brings us to the legal implications of what happened. This was a printout from the Arizona Revised Statutes website, with the relevant sections highlighted in yellow. In Arizona, deliberately destroying someone else's property worth more than $10,000 is criminal damage in the first degree, a Class 4 felony punishable by up to 3 3/4 years in prison and fines up to $150,000. Jessica went completely white. You're not. You can't be serious about pressing charges. I'm your sister. You're my sister who committed a felony, I said matter-of-factly. The fact that we're related doesn't change the law. The fact that you didn't know the dress was valuable doesn't change the fact that you deliberately destroyed it. I looked around the table at my family. But I'm not here to talk about criminal charges. I'm here to talk about how this family is going to change moving forward. I pulled out the final set of documents, copies of the power of attorney papers Dad had signed, along with detailed financial statements showing the value of every asset he owned. These papers give me legal authority over Dad's finances, including the house, the business, and all investment accounts. I've spent the past few days getting a complete picture of our family's financial situation, and I have to say, it's quite impressive. Dad was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Shaira, those papers were meant for emergencies, not for you to start making unilateral decisions about family finances. Dad, this is an emergency, I said. This is an emergency of basic human decency. This is an emergency of respect and recognition. This is an emergency of a family dynamic that has become so toxic that one daughter can destroy irreplaceable family history, while the other daughter is expected to just accept it and move on. I spread out the financial documents so everyone could see them. Here's what I've learned. The house is worth $412,000 free and clear. Phoenix Property Solutions generates about $70,000 in monthly revenue and is worth approximately $800,000. The investment accounts total $240,000. Combined, this family has assets worth nearly $1.5 million. Jessica was staring at the numbers with obvious shock. I don't think she'd ever realized how much money our parents actually had. Mom and Dad looked uncomfortable having their financial situation laid out so explicitly. But I wasn't done yet. Here's what I've also learned, I continued. Of the investment money that was supposed to be divided equally between Jessica and me, Jessica's account has nearly $200,000, while mine has $43,000. The house is going to be left entirely to Jessica, in Dad's will. The business is also going to Jessica because, quote, she'll need more help getting established in life. I looked around the table at their guilty faces. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. Jessica gets the house, the business, most of the investment money, and a $8,000 wedding dress. I get $43,000 and the responsibility of managing everyone else's finances. Does that seem fair to anyone? Mom was wringing her hands again. Sweetheart, it's not that we love Jessica more than you. It's just that you've always been so independent and capable. We knew you'd be fine on your own. So you punished me for being responsible by giving everything to the daughter who's never had to be responsible for anything in her life? I shook my head. That's not love, Mom. That's taking advantage of someone's good nature until they finally stop letting you. I gathered up all the documents and put them back in the folder. Here's what's going to happen. I'm restructuring this family's financial arrangements to reflect reality instead of favoritism. The investment accounts are going to be split equally, which means Jessica owes me about $78,000. The house is going to be put in a trust that benefits both daughters equally, and the business is going to be sold, with the proceeds divided fairly. Dad started to protest, but I held up my hand. I have legal authority to make these decisions, and I'm making them. This family has had 28 years to treat me fairly, and instead you've consistently chosen to favor Jessica while taking advantage of my reliability and competence. That ends now. Jessica finally found her voice again, though she still looked like she was in shock. You can't just steal everything from me because you're mad about a dress. I'm not stealing anything, Jessica. I'm correcting a decades-long pattern of theft. You've been stealing my share of family resources, my parents' attention, my sense of worth and belonging in this family. You've been stealing credit for being the good daughter, while I did all the actual work of being responsible and reliable. I looked at her directly. And 3 days ago, you stole something irreplaceable from our family history because you couldn't stand the thought of me having something beautiful to wear to your wedding. I stood up from the table, feeling more powerful than I ever had in my life. The wedding is in 11 days. Between now and then, you have a choice to make. You can accept that this family dynamic has permanently changed and start treating me with the respect I deserve. Or you can continue to act like a spoiled child and find out what happens when someone with legal authority over your inheritance decides they've had enough. Mom was sobbing openly now. Please, Shaira. We're a family. We can work this out without lawyers and legal documents. Can't we just talk about this? We tried talking about it 3 days ago, Mom. I tried to talk about the significance of Nana's dress, about honoring family history, about wanting to feel connected to our heritage. Jessica's response was to destroy it completely rather than let me wear it. Your response was to take her side and tell me to go buy something from a department store. I picked up my folder. We're past talking now. Now we're at the point where actions have consequences, and some of those consequences are permanent. As I headed toward the kitchen door, I turned back one more time. Oh, and Jessica? I'd suggest you start thinking about how you're going to explain to Tyler's family why your wedding might be a little less elaborate than planned. It turns out that destroying other people's property can be an expensive mistake. I left them, sitting at the table in stunned silence, and went upstairs to my room, where I spent the evening making more phone calls and sending more emails. I contacted a real estate agent about listing the house. I reached out to business brokers about selling Phoenix Property Solutions. I scheduled meetings with financial advisors about restructuring the investment accounts. Most importantly, I started looking at apartments in Seattle. I'd always wanted to live in the Pacific Northwest, and now I had the financial resources to make it happen. My job skills were transferable, and there were plenty of opportunities in property assessment and real estate in a growing city like Seattle. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just planning to survive my family's treatment of me. I wasn't just trying to find ways to cope with being the less favored daughter. I was planning to build a completely new life, funded by resources that should have been mine all along, in a place where nobody knew my history or had preconceived notions about my worth. Jessica thought destroying Nana's dress would solve her problem of having an inappropriately dressed sister at her wedding. What she'd actually done was solve my problem of being trapped in a family that didn't value me. She'd given me the motivation and justification I needed to finally use the power I'd been quietly accumulating for years. Her wedding was 10 days away, and she still had no idea how completely her world was about to change. The morning after our family meeting, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Word had apparently spread beyond our kitchen table, and the fallout was beginning in earnest. Jessica had called her maid of honor, who had called Tyler, who had called his parents, who had apparently called half of Phoenix to discuss the family crisis that was threatening their son's wedding. I scrolled through the messages while drinking my coffee, watching my phone buzz with increasingly frantic attempts to reach me. Jessica's texts started apologetic and quickly devolved into desperate, "Please call me back. We need to fix this." Tyler's parents are asking questions I can't answer. The wedding is in 9 days, Shaira. 9 days. You're going to ruin everything over a stupid dress. There it was again. A stupid dress. Even now, even after seeing the professional appraisal, even after learning she'd committed a felony, Jessica still couldn't bring herself to acknowledge what she'd actually destroyed. To her, it was still just a stupid dress that I was overreacting about, not a $60,000 piece of family history that connected us to our grandmother's immigrant story. Mom's texts were more emotional. "Your father didn't sleep all night. Please come home so we can talk." I keep thinking about Nana Rose and how disappointed she would be to see our family fighting like this. "Whatever we did wrong, we can fix it. Just please don't tear our family apart." Dad's messages were shorter and more businesslike. "We need to discuss the legal implications of what you're proposing. I spoke to a lawyer this morning. Call me." This has gone too far, Shaira. But the most interesting messages came from people I hadn't expected to hear from. Aunt Linda, Dad's sister who lived in Tucson, had somehow gotten wind of the situation. "Heard about Nana's dress. I'm devastated. That dress was supposed to be preserved for future generations. Call me when you have time to talk." My cousin, Maria, Aunt Linda's daughter, sent a longer message. "Mom told me what happened. I can't believe Jessica would destroy something so precious. I remember Nana showing us that dress when we were kids and telling us about how she saved for months to afford the fabric. This is heartbreaking." Even more surprising was a message from Tyler himself. "Shaira, I know we don't know each other well, but Jessica told me what happened, and I think you have every right to be upset. I don't understand why she would do something like that. Can we talk?" Tyler reaching out directly was unexpected. He'd always seemed like a nice enough guy, but I'd assumed he was just another spoiled rich kid who'd never faced any real consequences for anything. The fact that he was apparently questioning Jessica's actions rather than automatically supporting her suggested that maybe there was more to him than I'd given him credit for. I decided to respond to Tyler first. His message felt the most genuine, and I was curious about what he had to say. I called him back around 10 in the morning, when I knew Jessica would be at work and couldn't overhear or interfere. "Shaira," he answered on the first ring. "Thank you for calling me back. I wasn't sure you would." "To be honest, I wasn't sure I would either," I said. "But your message sounded sincere, and that's not something I'm getting a lot of from my family right now." There was a pause, and then Tyler said something that surprised me. "Jessica told me about the dress, but she left out some pretty important details, like the fact that it was worth $60,000, and that it belonged to your grandmother, and that you'd specifically asked to wear it to honor her memory." "What version of the story did you get?" I asked, genuinely curious about how Jessica had spun this to make herself look better. "I was told that you were being difficult about finding appropriate wedding attire, that you'd insisted on wearing some old dress that wasn't suitable for the occasion, and that Jessica had to intervene to prevent you from embarrassing the family." Tyler's voice was careful, like he was choosing his words deliberately. "But after our families started getting involved and asking questions, I did some research on vintage wedding dresses. A 1940s Italian dress in good condition? That's museum-quality stuff, Shaira." I felt an unexpected surge of gratitude toward Tyler for taking the time to actually understand what had been lost. "It really was beautiful," I said quietly. "Nana? Rose used to tell us about how she worked extra shifts at the textile factory to save up for the silk, how the local seamstress taught her to do the beadwork herself because they couldn't afford to pay someone else to do it. It took her 8 months to make that dress. And Jessica destroyed it in about 8 seconds, Tyler said grimly. Look, I love your sister, and I'm still planning to marry her next week, but what she did was inexcusable. My grandmother left me her father's pocket watch when she died, and if someone destroyed that because they thought it was old and ugly, I'd probably lose my mind. So you understand why I can't just let this go? I asked. I understand why you're furious, Tyler said. What I don't understand is why your parents aren't furious too. When Jessica told me they basically took her side, I honestly couldn't believe it. My parents would have grounded me until I was 30 if I'd done something like that when I was younger. This was the longest conversation Tyler and I had ever had, and I was starting to see why Jessica had fallen for him. He seemed to have actual empathy and emotional intelligence, qualities that were often in short supply in our family. Tyler, I said, can I ask you something? And I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course. How much do you know about Jessica's relationship with money and responsibility? Because what she did to the dress isn't really about the dress. It's part of a much bigger pattern of behavior that our family has been enabling for years. There was a long pause. What kind of pattern? He asked finally. I spent the next 20 minutes giving Tyler a condensed version of Jessica's history. The changing majors, the extended college career funded by family money, the part-time jobs that never turned into real careers, the constant financial support from our parents while I'd been independent since I was 22. I told him about the unequal inheritance plans, about the investment accounts that heavily favored Jessica, about the way family resources were always directed toward supporting her dreams, while mine were considered less important. Jesus, Tyler said when I finished. I knew she'd had help from your parents, but I didn't realize it was to that extent. She told me she'd worked her way through college and that your parents had helped equally with both daughters' education. Tyler, Jessica has never worked her way through anything in her life, I said. She's never had to face real consequences for her choices, because our parents always step in to fix things for her. That's why she thought she could destroy my grandmother's dress and not have it matter. She's used to being able to do whatever she wants and having everyone else just deal with it. Another long pause. Are you going to call off the financial stuff if she apologizes? If the family makes things right? I don't think Jessica is capable of the kind of apology this situation requires, I said honestly. A real apology would mean acknowledging that she destroyed something irreplaceable out of pure selfishness, that she's benefited from unfair family favoritism her entire life, and that she needs to fundamentally change how she treats other people. Do you think she's capable of that level of self-reflection? Tyler was quiet for so long that I thought the call might have dropped. Finally, he said, No, I don't think she is, and that's something I'm going to have to think about. Tyler, I'm not trying to break up your engagement or ruin your wedding, I said. But I am done being the family member who just accepts mistreatment for the sake of keeping everyone else comfortable. If Jessica wants to marry someone, she needs to be with someone who will hold her accountable when she does hurtful things, not someone who will enable her the way our parents have. I appreciate your honesty, Tyler said. And for what it's worth, I think you're handling this exactly right. Someone needs to force this family to face some hard truths, and it shouldn't have to be you, but if it is, then I'm glad you're strong enough to do it. After I hung up with Tyler, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not hope that my family would magically change and start treating me better, but hope that maybe Jessica would end up with someone who wouldn't let her continue down the path of entitlement and cruelty that our parents had set her on. The rest of the morning brought a parade of phone calls I didn't answer and increasingly desperate text messages. But around noon, something shifted. I got a call from the real estate agent I'd contacted about listing the house. Ms. Martinez, she said, I've done the preliminary assessment of your property, and I have to say, you're sitting on a gold mine. Houses in your neighborhood are selling within days of being listed, often above asking price. If you're serious about selling, I'd recommend we move quickly. How quickly? I asked. We could have it listed by Friday if you can get it staged and photographed this week. I'm confident we'd have offers by the weekend. I thought about this. Listing the house would make everything real in a way that family meetings and legal documents couldn't. Once there was a for sale sign in the front yard, the entire neighborhood would know that something major was happening with our family. There would be no going back to pretending this was just a temporary disagreement that could be smoothed over with time. Let's do it, I said. Schedule the staging and photography for Thursday. I want it listed by Friday morning. Excellent, she said. I'll need to coordinate with the property owner, of course. Will your father be available to sign the listing agreement? I have power of attorney, I said. I can sign all the necessary documents. Perfect. I'll email you the paperwork this afternoon. After I hung up, I sat in my room looking around at the house I'd grown up in. My childhood bedroom with its faded paint and outdated furniture. The hallways where I'd walked carefully for years, trying not to take up too much space or ask for too much attention. The kitchen where I'd just upended 28 years of family dynamics with a manila folder full of legal documents. In less than a week, this house would be on the market. In a few weeks, it would probably be sold to strangers who would repaint the walls and replace the fixtures and turn it into their own family's story. The thought should have made me sad, but instead it felt liberating. This house held too many memories of being invisible, of being taken for granted, of watching Jessica get everything while I got the leftovers. My phone rang again. This time, it was Aunt Linda, and I decided to take the call. "Shaira, honey," she said as soon as I answered. "I heard what happened with Nana's dress, and I am just sick about it. That dress was a piece of our family's history." "I know, Aunt Linda," I said. "I tried to explain that to everyone, but they didn't seem to care." "Well, I care," she said firmly. "And I want you to know that not everyone in this family thinks what Jessica did was acceptable. Your cousin Maria and I have been talking, and we're both horrified." "I appreciate that," I said. "It's been pretty isolating feeling like I'm the only one who thinks this is a big deal." "It is a big deal," Aunt Linda said. "But honey, I also heard some rumors about legal documents and selling the house. Is that really necessary?" I took a deep breath. "Aunt Linda, Jessica destroying the dress wasn't just about the dress. It was the final straw in a pattern of treatment that's been going on my entire life. My parents have consistently favored Jessica over me, financially and emotionally. They've given her every advantage while expecting me to be grateful for whatever was left over. When I tried to wear something meaningful to connect with our family history, Jessica destroyed it rather than let me have one special moment." "I understand you're hurt," Aunt Linda said carefully. "But restructuring the family's entire finances seems pretty drastic." "Is it more drastic than destroying a $60,000 family heirloom?" I asked. "Because that's what Jessica did. And instead of being horrified and demanding that she make it right, my parents told me I was being dramatic and needed to get over it." There was a long pause. $60,000? Aunt Linda's voice was faint. "I had it professionally appraised," I said. "Nana's dress was worth at least that much, possibly more. Jessica committed a felony, Aunt Linda. She destroyed property worth more than most people's cars, and she did it on purpose." "Oh my God," Aunt Linda breathed. "I had no idea it was that valuable. I mean, I knew it was special, but—" "The monetary value isn't even the most important part," I said. "The most important part is that it was irreplaceable. It was our connection to Nana Rose's story, to the sacrifices she made, to the love and hope she put into making something beautiful for her wedding day. And Jessica destroyed all of that because she thought I wasn't worthy of wearing it." Aunt Linda was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "What can I do to help?" "You can stop trying to convince me to forgive and forget," I said. "This family has a problem with accountability, and someone needs to force them to face it. If that someone has to be me, then so be it." "Okay," she said quietly. "You're right. What Jessica did was unforgivable, and your parents' reaction was almost as bad. You do what you need to do, honey. You have my support." After I hung up with Aunt Linda, I felt a shift in the momentum. Having family members who understood and supported my position made everything feel more legitimate, less like I was having an emotional breakdown, and more like I was finally standing up for myself in a situation that demanded it. The afternoon brought more calls and messages, but the tone was starting to change. Instead of just frantic attempts to get me to come to my senses, people were starting to ask more specific questions about what had happened and why. Word was spreading through our extended family and social circles, and the more details that came out, the more people seemed to understand why I was so upset. Jessica's friend Amanda called me around 3 o'clock. We'd never been particularly close, but she'd been the maid of honor and had apparently been fielding questions from other wedding guests about the family situation. "Shaira," she said, "I know this is awkward, but I need to ask you something. Directly. Jessica told me you're trying to ruin her wedding because you're jealous of her dress. But Tyler told his cousin that she destroyed a valuable family heirloom. What actually happened?" I gave Amanda the same factual account I'd been giving everyone. The dress's history, its appraised value, Jessica's deliberate destruction of it, and my family's reaction. I didn't editorialize or try to make Jessica look worse than the facts. Already made her look. When I finished, Amanda was quiet for a long time. "Jesus, Shaira, that's not what Jessica told me at all. She made it sound like you were being unreasonable about wedding attire, and she had to put her foot down." "Did she mention that the dress was worth $60,000? I asked. "She said it was some old dress from the attic that probably had moths in it," Amanda said. "She definitely didn't mention that it was valuable or historically significant." "That's because Jessica has never valued anything that didn't directly benefit her," I said. "The fact that this dress meant something to me, that it connected me to our grandmother's story, that it was irreplaceable, none of that mattered. To her. All that mattered was that she didn't want me wearing it to her wedding." Amanda sighed. "Look, I've been Jessica's friend for 10 years, and I love her, but she's always had a problem with sharing attention. Even in college, if someone else was getting compliments or recognition, she'd find a way to redirect the focus back to herself." "That's exactly what this was about," I said. "She couldn't stand the thought of me wearing something beautiful and meaningful to her wedding. She'd rather destroy it completely than let me have one moment of feeling special." "Are you really going to sell the family house?" Amanda asked. "The house is going on the market Friday," I said, "along with the business and a complete restructuring of the family's financial arrangements. Jessica and my parents had 28 years to treat me fairly, and they chose not to. Now they get to live with the consequences of that choice." "And the wedding?" "The wedding is Jessica's problem to figure out," I said. "I'm done organizing my life around other people's events and expectations. If she wants to get married next weekend, she can do it with whatever resources she has left after making restitution for the dress she destroyed." After Amanda hung up, I realized that the conversation had crystallized something important for me. I wasn't just angry about the dress, and I wasn't just hurt by my family's favoritism. I was tired of being expected to manage everyone else's emotions and smooth over conflicts that other people created. For years, I'd been the family peacekeeper, the one who absorbed tension and deflected drama so that everyone else could be comfortable. When Jessica was cruel, I was expected to understand that she was going through a lot. When my parents were unfair, I was supposed to be mature enough to let it go. When family events were stressful, I was the one who worked behind the scenes to make sure everything went smoothly. I was done with all of that. Done being the family emotional support system while getting nothing in return. Done pretending that Jessica's behavior was acceptable because it was easier than confronting her. Done accepting financial inequality because I was supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps I received. The wedding was in 8 days, and Jessica was starting to realize that her perfect day might not be so perfect after all. The house would be listed in 3 days, and my parents were starting to understand that this wasn't a temporary tantrum they could wait out. The business was being evaluated for sale, the investment accounts were being restructured, and I was actively planning my move to Seattle. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to my family's choices. I was making choices of my own, choices that prioritized my own well-being and future over everyone else's comfort and convenience. It felt scary and exhilarating and absolutely right. That evening, Jessica came home early from work and knocked on my bedroom door. I could hear her crying on the other side, but I didn't open it. Instead, I sat at my desk, continuing to plan my new life while she pleaded with me through the door. "Shaira, please," she sobbed. "I know I messed up. I know you're hurt. But please don't destroy everything because of one mistake. Please don't ruin my wedding. Please don't make Mom and Dad lose their house. I'm sorry, okay? I'm really, really sorry." But I didn't answer because I knew the difference between being sorry you hurt someone and being sorry you got caught. Jessica wasn't apologizing because she understood what she'd done wrong. She was apologizing because she was finally facing consequences for her actions, and she didn't like how it felt. The dress was still destroyed. Nana Rose's story was still lost. The family dynamic that had damaged me for 28 years was still intact underneath Jessica's tears and panic. Sorry wasn't enough anymore. Sorry was what you said when you spilled wine on someone's shirt, not when you deliberately destroyed irreplaceable family history. Sorry was what you said when you were late to dinner, not when you committed a felony against your own sister. Jessica could cry outside my door all she wanted, but her tears weren't going to resurrect Nana's dress, and they weren't going to resurrect the version of me that would have accepted this treatment and moved on for the sake of family peace. That version of me had died 3 days ago in our kitchen, along with 60 years of preserved family history. What was left was someone who finally understood her own worth and had the legal authority to demand that others recognize it too. Friday morning arrived with the sound of trucks pulling into our driveway. The staging company had arrived early to transform our family home into the kind of pristine, impersonal space that would appeal to potential buyers. I watched from my bedroom window as strangers carried in neutral furniture and artwork, systematically removing every trace of our family's personality from the rooms where I'd grown up. The real estate photographer was setting up his equipment when Jessica burst through the front door, still wearing her work uniform from the boutique. She'd apparently driven straight home after seeing the staging trucks, and her face was a mixture of panic and disbelief. "You actually did it," she said, staring at the workers who were rearranging our living room. "You actually listed the house." I came downstairs to find her standing in the foyer, looking lost and small in a way I'd never seen before. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I told you I was going to," I said simply. "The listing goes live at noon." "But this is our home, Shaira," she said, her voice breaking. "This is where we grew up. All our memories are here." "My memories here aren't exactly pleasant," I replied. "This is where I learned that I was less important than you. This is where I was taught that my feelings didn't matter as much as yours. This is where you destroyed something irreplaceable just to prove you could." Jessica looked around at the staging team efficiently erasing our family's presence from each room. "Where are Mom and Dad supposed to live? They can't afford to buy another house, especially not with real estate prices right now." "They'll figure it out," I said. "They're both intelligent adults with good credit and steady income. I'm sure they'll manage just fine, especially once they're not supporting your lifestyle anymore." The real estate agent, Mrs. Chen, arrived around 10 with her assistant and a thick folder of paperwork. She was a small, efficient woman who'd been selling high-end properties in Phoenix for 20 years, and she moved through our house with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every possible family drama play out over real estate transactions. "The staging looks excellent," she told me as we walked through the transformed rooms. "We'll have professional photos done this morning, and the listing will be live by noon as planned. I expect we'll have showings starting this weekend." Jessica followed us around like a lost puppy, occasionally making comments about family memories tied to specific rooms or features. "This is where we always put our Christmas tree," she said when we reached the living room. "And that window seat is where I used to read when I was little." Mrs. Chen glanced at me with raised eyebrows. I'd explained the family situation in general terms when I'd hired her, so she understood that this wasn't a typical family sale. "Jessica," I said quietly, "you need to leave. This is a business transaction now, and your emotional commentary isn't helpful." "This is my house too," she protested. "I grew up here just as much as you did." "Actually, it's Dad's house, and I have legal authority over Dad's assets," I corrected. which means it's my decision to make, and I've made it. Mrs. Chen tactfully suggested that Jessica might be more comfortable waiting in another room while we finished the walkthrough, but Jessica refused to leave. She seemed to think that if she just stayed close enough, she could somehow prevent this from happening through sheer force of will. The photographer finished his work around 11:30, and Mrs. Chen uploaded the listing to the MLS while we sat at our kitchen table. I watched her type in the description. Stunning 4-bedroom. Family home in desirable Desert Vista neighborhood. Completely updated kitchen, spacious bedrooms, mature landscaping. Move-in ready. Motivated seller. Motivated seller. That was one way to put it. At exactly noon, Mrs. Chen hit the publish button, and our family home officially went on the market. Within minutes, her phone started ringing with calls from other agents scheduling showings for their clients. "We have 3 showings scheduled for tomorrow already," she told me, "and 2 more for Sunday. I told you this neighborhood was hot right now." Jessica had been sitting silently at the kitchen table during all of this, but when Mrs. Chen mentioned the weekend showings, she finally spoke up. "You can't have people traipsing through here this weekend. My wedding is next Saturday. We're supposed to be getting ready, having family time, celebrating together." Mrs. Chen looked at me for guidance. "We can work around family events if necessary," she said diplomatically. "No," I said firmly. "The showings proceed as scheduled. Jessica's wedding plans don't take priority over the sale of this house." "Shaira, please," Jessica said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "Can't we at least wait until after the wedding? Just 1 more week?" "You had 28 years to treat me like family," I said. "You chose not to. Now you get to live with the timeline I've chosen." After Mrs. Chen left, Jessica and I were alone in the house for the first time since our family meeting earlier in the week. The staging furniture made everything feel foreign and impersonal, like we were guests in someone else's home rather than sisters who'd grown up there. "I need to ask you something," Jessica said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table that now held a generic centerpiece instead of Mom's usual collection of mail and newspapers. "And I need you to be honest with me." I waited for her to continue. "Is there anything I can do to fix this? Anything at all?" Her voice was small and scared, and for the first time since this whole situation started, she seemed to be grasping the magnitude of what she'd set in motion. I considered her question carefully. "Do you actually understand what you did wrong, Jessica? Not just that you made me angry, but what you actually did wrong." She was quiet for a long time, clearly thinking about how to answer. "I destroyed something that was important to you," she said finally. "That's part of it," I said. "What else?" Another long pause. "I destroyed something that was valuable." "What else?" I hurt your feelings about wanting to honor Nana Rose's memory." I shook my head. "You're still not getting it. This isn't about hurt feelings, Jessica. This is about the fact that you committed a crime. You deliberately destroyed property worth $60,000. In Arizona, that's a felony. You could go to prison for what you did." Jessica went pale. "But I didn't know it was worth that much." "That doesn't matter. If you steal a car and you thought it was worth $5,000 but it was actually worth $50,000, you still get charged based on what it was actually worth, not what you thought it was worth." I leaned forward across the table. "But the legal issues aren't even the most important part." "Then what is? The most important part is that you destroyed something irreplaceable because you're so entitled and selfish that you couldn't stand the thought of me having something beautiful for one day. You've been the center of attention in this family your entire life, and when I asked for one small thing, to honor our grandmother by wearing her dress, you decided I didn't deserve it." Jessica was crying now, but they seemed like different tears than the ones she'd shed earlier in the week. Less frantic, more genuinely remorseful. "I was jealous," she admitted quietly. "The dress was so beautiful, And when you put it on to show Mom, you looked really pretty. And I got scared that people would be looking at you instead of me at my own wedding. This was the closest thing to honesty I'd heard from Jessica in years, maybe ever. So you destroyed it rather than let me look pretty for one day. I didn't think about what it meant to you, she said. I just knew I didn't want you wearing it, and I acted without thinking. You acted without thinking about me, I corrected. You acted without considering my feelings, or Nana Rose's memory, or the fact that some things can't be replaced once they're gone. Jessica nodded miserably. I know that now. I've been thinking about it all week, and I know how awful it was. I don't know how to fix something like this. I looked at my sister across the table, this woman who'd been my rival and tormentor for 28 years, and I realized that she was finally asking the right question. Not, how can I make you stop being mad at me, or how can I get things back to normal, but how can I fix what I've done? The problem was, I wasn't sure it could be fixed, not completely. Jessica, I said carefully, do you understand that the dress can't be restored? That what you destroyed is gone forever? She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. And do you understand that this isn't just about the dress? That this is about a pattern of behavior where you take and take and take from this family, and when someone finally asks for something small, you destroy it rather than share. She nodded again. And do you understand that the financial arrangements I'm making aren't just revenge? That they're correcting decades of unfair treatment that has left me with a fraction of the resources you've been given? This nod was slower, more reluctant, but she did nod. Then, here's what fixing this would look like, I said. First, you would need to take full responsibility for what you did, not just to me, but to everyone. Mom, Dad, Tyler, the wedding guests, everyone who's heard some version of this story. You would need to tell them that you deliberately destroyed a $60,000 family heirloom because you were jealous and selfish. Jessica flinched, but she didn't argue. Second, you would need to make financial restitution for what you destroyed. $60,000 plus the cost of the professional appraisals I had to get to document the value. I don't have $60,000, Jessica said quietly. No, you don't. But you have access to almost $200,000 in your investment account that was supposed to be split equally between us. You could start there. Jessica was quiet for a long time, clearly doing math in her head. That would leave me with less money than you. That's correct, I said. For the first time in our lives, you would have less than me. How does that feel? Terrifying, she admitted. Good, I said. Maybe terror will teach you something that comfort never did. We sat in silence for several minutes while Jessica processed what I'd told her. Finally, she spoke again. If I did all of that, if I took responsibility and paid the money back, would you call off the house sale and the business stuff? I considered this. I don't know, I said honestly. The financial restructuring isn't just about punishing you, Jessica. It's about protecting myself. For 28 years, I've been the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who could be counted on to sacrifice for the family. And what did it get me? A smaller inheritance, less attention, and a sister who felt comfortable destroying my most precious possessions. But we're family, Jessica said desperately. Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore? Family is supposed to protect each other, I said. Family is supposed to care about each other's feelings and dreams and important memories. You destroyed family history because you couldn't stand sharing attention for one day. So no, being family doesn't mean anything to me anymore if that's how family treats each other. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. It was Mrs. Chen with an update about the house. Shaira, she said excitedly. I have incredible news. We've had 17 inquiries about the house since the listing went live 2 hours ago. And I just received a full-price cash offer from an investor who wants to close in 2 weeks. Jessica went white as she listened to my side of the conversation. That's faster than I expected, I told Mrs. Chen. Let me think about it and call you back. After I hung up, Jessica stared at me with something approaching desperation. A cash offer already? But we just listed it this morning. Apparently, it's a very desirable property, I said. Mrs. Chen warned me this might happen. Houses in this neighborhood are selling almost immediately. Are you going to accept it? I looked around our transformed kitchen, with its staging company's generic decorations and carefully arranged fake fruit. I think I might. A clean, fast sale would let me move on with my life more quickly. But that means Mom and Dad would have to be out in 2 weeks, Jessica said. They don't even have anywhere to go yet. They'll figure it out, I said. They're resourceful people when they need to be. Jessica stood up abruptly from the table. I can't let this happen, she said. I can't let you destroy our entire family because I made one mistake. One mistake, I repeated. Jessica, you destroyed a $60,000 piece of family history. In what world is that just one mistake? In the world where we're supposed to forgive each other and work things out because we love each other, she said, her voice rising. In the world where families don't tear each other apart over material possessions. This isn't about material possessions, I said, standing up to face her. This is about respect. This is about recognizing that your actions have consequences. This is about learning that other people's feelings and memories matter just as much as yours do. Jessica was crying again, but now there was anger mixed with the tears. You're enjoying this, she accused. You're enjoying watching me suffer. You're enjoying having power over all of us for once. You know what, Jessica? Maybe I am enjoying it a little bit, I admitted. Maybe it feels good to finally be in a position where my choices matter, where people have to consider my feelings before they act. Maybe it feels good to not be the family doormat for the first time in my life. So this is all about revenge then, she said bitterly. No, this is about justice, I corrected. Revenge would be destroying something you love just to hurt you. Justice is making sure that your actions have appropriate consequences and that you learn to treat people better. Jessica wiped her eyes and looked at me with something I'd never seen from her before, a mixture of fear and genuine respect. What do you want from me, Shaira? What would it take for you to forgive me and stop all of this? I thought about her question for a long time. What did I want? I wanted the dress back, but that was impossible. I wanted a lifetime of equal treatment, but the past couldn't be changed. I wanted parents who would have protected me instead of enabling Jessica, but they'd already shown who they really were. I want you to become the kind of person who would never do something like this again, I said finally. I want you to understand that other people's happiness is just as important as yours. I want you to take responsibility for the damage you've caused instead of expecting everyone else to just get over it because you're sorry. But how do I prove that to you? Jessica asked. How do I show you that I can change? You start by accepting the consequences of what you've done without trying to minimize them or escape them, I said. You pay back the money you owe. You tell the truth about what happened to everyone who's heard a sanitized version of this story. You stop expecting other people to sacrifice for your comfort. Jessica nodded slowly. And if I do all of that? Then maybe we can have a relationship where I'm not constantly waiting for you to hurt me again, I said. But the house is still selling, and the business is still being liquidated, and the investment accounts are still being restructured. Those changes aren't about punishing you anymore, Jessica. They're about protecting me. From what? From ever being in a position where I'm financially dependent on a family that doesn't value me, I said. From ever having to smile and play nice with people who think my feelings are less important than their convenience. From ever having to watch someone destroy something precious to me while everyone else tells me to get over it. Jessica stared, at me for a long moment, and I could see her really processing what I was saying for the first time. The reality that this wasn't just a tantrum that would blow over. The understanding that she'd set something in motion that couldn't be undone. With apologies and tears. "The wedding is in a week," she said quietly. "Yes, it is," I replied. "Are you going to come?" I looked at my sister, this woman who'd been both my closest family member and my biggest tormentor for my entire life. The woman who'd destroyed something irreplaceable because she couldn't stand sharing attention for one day. The woman who was finally starting to understand that her actions had consequences she couldn't charm or cry her way out of. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Ask me again in a week and see what kind of person you've decided to become." That evening, as I sat in my room surrounded by boxes I'd started packing for my move to Seattle, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but a deep sense of rightness about the path I'd chosen. My phone buzzed with a text. From Tyler. "Jessica told me about your conversation today. Thank you for being honest with her about what real accountability looks like. Whatever happens next, I think you're doing the right thing." Another text came from Aunt Linda. "Heard the house is already getting offers. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. Nana Rose would be proud too." And then, unexpectedly, a text from Mom. "Your father and I have been talking. We owe you an apology that's much bigger than anything we can say in a text message. Can we please sit down and have a real conversation about how we failed you all these years?" I stared at that last message for a long time. It was the first acknowledgement from either of my parents that this situation was about more than just the dress, that there were deeper issues that needed to be addressed. It was the first time either of them had used the word failed in connection with their treatment of me. I typed back, "I'm willing to listen, but I'm not willing to go back to the way things were." Mom's response came quickly. "We understand. We don't want to go back either. We want to do better." Whether they actually could do better remained to be seen. But for the first time since this whole situation started, I felt like maybe there was a possibility for something new to be built, from the wreckage of what had been destroyed. The dress was still gone forever. The trust that had been broken might never be fully repaired. But maybe, just maybe, something better could grow in the space that had been cleared by finally telling the truth about how this family really worked. Jessica's wedding was in 6 days. The house would probably be sold by then, and I would have to decide whether I was ready to forgive a sister who was finally learning what real accountability looked like, or whether some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay that way. The morning of Jessica's wedding dawned clear and bright, exactly the kind of perfect Arizona day she'd been praying for. I woke up in my mostly empty bedroom, surrounded by packed boxes and the strange quiet that comes when a house is no longer really a home. The buyers had accelerated their timeline and we'd be closing on Monday. By Tuesday, I'd be on a plane to Seattle with everything I owned fitting into 6 suitcases and a shipping container. I hadn't decided whether to attend the ceremony until I walked downstairs and found Jessica sitting at our kitchen table, still in her pajamas, with a cup of coffee and a cashier's check for $62,000. "The extra $2,000 is for the appraisal costs and your time dealing with all of this," she said without looking up. "I liquidated my entire investment account yesterday." I picked up the check and examined it. It was real, made out to me. Signed by Jessica's bank manager. "Where did you get the money to make up the difference?" I asked. Her investment account had been worth about $45,000 after we'd equalized the accounts. "I sold my engagement ring," she said quietly. "The one Tyler gave me last Christmas. It was worth $28,000. I stared at her. "Jessica, that ring was from Tyler. You can't get married without your engagement ring." "I can. Get married without a lot of things, apparently," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "But I can't get married knowing that I destroyed something irreplaceable and never made it right." This wasn't the Jessica I'd grown up with. This wasn't the sister who'd always found ways to avoid consequences or shift blame to someone else. This was someone I didn't recognize, someone who'd chosen to sacrifice something precious to her in order to take responsibility for the damage she'd caused. "Does Tyler know?" I asked. "I told him yesterday when I went to the jeweler," she said. "He said he was proud of me for doing the right thing, even if it was late. He said the wedding was more important than the ring, and that we could get a new one someday when we could afford it." I sat down across from her at the table, still holding the check. "This doesn't bring Nana's dress back." "I know," she said. "Nothing can do that. But at least now you have the money to do something meaningful with it, something that would honor her memory in a way that I prevented you from doing." We sat in silence for several minutes. Two sisters who'd spent 28 years locked, in an unequal competition, finally meeting each other as equals. Jessica looked smaller somehow, less certain of her place in the world, but also more real than I'd ever seen her. "I need to tell you something else," she said. "I've been talking to a therapist this week." Tyler suggested it after our conversation on Tuesday. "She helped me understand that what I did to your dress wasn't really about the dress at all." "What was it about?" "It was about the fact that I've never learned how to handle not being the center of attention," Jessica admitted. "Growing up, I got so used to being the pretty one, the charming one, the one everyone focused on, that I started to believe that was the only way I had value. When you put on Nana's dress and looked so beautiful and elegant, I felt like I was disappearing." This was a level of self-awareness I'd never heard from Jessica before. "So you destroyed the dress to make sure you stayed visible." "I destroyed the dress because I'm 26 years old and I still don't know how to share," she said. "Because somewhere along the way, I learned that there wasn't enough love or attention to go around, so I had to hoard it all for myself." I thought about this. "Jessica, there was always enough love to go around. The problem was that Mom and Dad decided to give most of it to you and leave me with scraps." "I know that now," she said. "The therapist helped me see that the way our parents treated us wasn't fair to either of us. You got less than you deserved, but I got turned into someone who didn't know how to function without constant validation and special treatment." She was right. Jessica had been damaged by our family's favoritism too, just in a different way. She'd been taught that her worth depended on being more important than everyone else, which had made her incapable of forming healthy relationships with people who expected to be treated as equals. "Are you going to keep seeing the therapist?" I asked. "Tyler and I are going to do couples counseling," she said. "I need to learn how to be married to someone without needing to be the most important thing in his life every single moment. And I need to learn how to have relationships where I give as much as I take." I looked at my sister and saw someone who was finally growing up, finally taking responsibility not just for what she'd done, but for who she'd become. It was 20 years too late, but it was something. "I have something for you too," I said, reaching into my purse. I pulled out a small wrapped box and placed it on the table between us. Jessica looked at it suspiciously. "What is it?" "Open it." She unwrapped the box carefully and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single pearl from Nana Rose's dress. I'd found it under the refrigerator when I was packing up the kitchen, probably kicked there during Jessica's destructive rampage. "It's all that's left," I said. "I had it set into a pendant for you. I thought maybe you could wear it today, as something borrowed and something that connects you to Nana Rose despite everything that happened." Jessica lifted the delicate gold chain and held it up to the light. The pearl was small but lustrous, still beautiful even separated from the dress it had once adorned. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Maybe not," I said. "But Nana Rose would have wanted her granddaughter to have something of hers on her wedding day. And despite everything, you're still her granddaughter." Jessica fastened the necklace around her neck and touched the pearl gently. "Will you help me get ready?" she asked. I know I don't have the right to ask, but Tyler's mom is handling the ceremony logistics, and I want my sister with me this morning. I looked at Jessica, really looked at her, and saw someone who was trying to become a better person. Someone who'd made a terrible mistake, but was willing to sacrifice everything she had to make it right. Someone who was finally learning that love wasn't a zero-sum game where she had to win and everyone else had to lose. Okay, I said, but we're going to do this differently than we've done everything else in our lives. What do you mean? I mean we're going to get ready as equals, I said. Not as the pretty sister and the helper sister, not as the star and the supporting cast, but as two women who are both important and both deserving of feeling beautiful. Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. I would like that very much. We spent the morning together in Jessica's room, doing each other's hair and makeup, sharing clothes and jewelry, talking about everything except the drama of the past week. For the first time in our lives, we weren't competing with each other. We were just sisters, helping each other prepare for an important day. When Jessica put on her wedding dress, she looked absolutely radiant. The $8,000 gown fit her perfectly, the beadwork catching the light as she moved. But what made her beautiful wasn't the expensive fabric or professional alterations. It was the way she carried herself, with less arrogance and more genuine joy than I'd ever seen from her. You look perfect, I told her, and I meant it. So do you, she said, admiring the simple blue dress I'd chosen for the ceremony. I'm sorry I almost prevented you from looking this beautiful at my wedding. I'm sorry I was so threatened by the idea of sharing attention with you. The ceremony was held at Tyler's family's country club, a sprawling venue with perfect landscaping and a view of the mountains. Everything was elegant and tasteful, exactly the kind of wedding Jessica had always dreamed of. As I watched her walk down the aisle on Dad's arm, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Pure happiness for my sister's joy, without any resentment or comparison. During the reception, Tyler's father made a toast that surprised everyone. To Jessica and Tyler, he said, raising his glass, and to the lesson that true love means growing into the kind of person your partner deserves. Jessica, we've watched you become more thoughtful, more generous, and more genuine over this past week, and we couldn't be more proud to welcome you into our family. Jessica looked across the room and caught my eye, smiling through happy tears. She knew that her transformation had started with the worst thing she'd ever done, but she also knew that it had led her to become the best version of herself. Later, that evening, as the reception was winding down, Mom and Dad approached me together. They looked nervous and older than I remembered, like the stress of the past week had aged them both. Shaira, Mom said, we need to apologize to you properly. Not just for what happened with the dress, but for 28 years of failing to protect you and treat you fairly. We got so caught up in managing Jessica's drama that we forgot to nurture your strengths, Dad added. We took advantage of your maturity and responsibility, and we let you carry burdens that should have been ours to handle. We're proud of you for standing up for yourself, Mom continued. We're proud of you for forcing this family to face some hard truths. And we're sorry it took something so drastic to make us see what we'd been doing wrong. I looked at my parents and saw people who were genuinely remorseful, not just about the immediate crisis, but about the larger patterns that had created it. I appreciate the apology, I said, but I need you to understand that I'm not going back to being the family caretaker. I'm not going back to sacrificing my needs for everyone else's comfort. We don't want you to, Dad said. We want you to build a life that makes you happy, even if that means we see you less or have to handle our own problems instead of relying on you to fix them. We're going to family therapy, Mom added. All of us, including Jessica and Tyler. We want to learn how to be the kind of family that supports everyone equally, instead of putting all the pressure on one person. As I drove home from the reception that night, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete peace with my family relationships. Not because everything had been fixed or forgiven, but because everyone had finally accepted responsibility for their role in the dysfunction. The house sold on Monday as planned. Mom and Dad moved into a smaller place across town, something they could afford on their retirement income without the property management business that I'd sold to a competitor. Jessica and Tyler honeymooned in Mexico, paying for the trip with money they'd saved instead of expecting family contributions. I flew to Seattle on Tuesday morning with 6 suitcases and a cashier's check for $62,000. I used the money as a down payment on a small house near the University District, close to the property assessment office where I'd already secured a job. For the first time in my life, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. 6 months later, I got a text from Jessica with a photo of her and Tyler at a community center, both wearing volunteer t-shirts. "Teaching financial literacy classes to young couples," the caption read. "Learning how to give back instead of just taking. Thank you for showing me what accountability looks like." I texted back a heart emoji and a photo of my own. Me standing in front of my new house with a small garden I'd planted in the front yard. "Learning how to bloom when I'm not living in someone else's shadow," I wrote. Jessica wrote back immediately. "You look beautiful. Nana Rose would be so proud." She was right. Nana Rose would have been proud, not just of the house or the garden, or the new life I'd built, but of the fact that I'd finally learned to value myself the way she'd valued that dress. Carefully, protectively, with the understanding that some things are too precious to let other people destroy. The dress was gone forever, but the lesson it had taught me would last the rest of my life. I'd learned that love without respect is just manipulation. I'd learned that family loyalty has to flow both ways to mean anything. And I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices, even when it hurts. Most importantly, I'd learned that I didn't need anyone else's permission to value myself. I didn't need to wait for my family to recognize my worth before I started protecting it. I could build a life where I mattered, where my feelings counted, where my memories were safe from people who didn't understand their significance. As I sat in my garden that evening, watching the sunset paint the Seattle sky in shades of pink and gold, I thought about Nana Rose and the dress she'd sacrificed so much to create. It had been destroyed, but in its destruction, it had created something new. A granddaughter who finally understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. That seemed like exactly the kind of legacy Nana Rose would have wanted to leave behind. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.